Thank you again, Deborah. Thanks to everybody who's attending today, and welcome to our September session of BusinessWise Insiders. The presentation will last around 20 minutes, after which you'll have a chance to introduce yourself, ask questions, and share your own perspective on any topic that's on your mind, but hopefully particularly today's topic with some of our wise guys as well as our other attendees. I'm going to move through the presentation fairly quickly, but we'll send, as I just mentioned, a follow-up email to everybody with instructions on how to access the slides and view a recording of the presentation. And during the presentation, you can also always ask questions in the chat window. And if we can't address it in real time, we can queue it up for discussion in the breakout rooms. So with that, let's turn to today's topic, which is what to do when your prospects reply to your prospecting emails. Because here's the thing, email lead gen campaigns, including the automated campaigns that we develop and run for our BusinessWise clients, generate replies of all different types. And while most of us know what to do when a prospect replies with an enthusiastic yes, many sales reps face a kind of paralysis when it comes to all the other kinds of replies that come in. So we're going to be looking at a handful of actual real-world prospect replies in an effort to show how a thoughtful response strategy can generate conversations and leads. So with that in mind, put yourself in the mindset of reaching out to a new prospect for the first time. So as I just mentioned, you probably don't need any advice on what to do if they reply with a yes. You get an appointment on your calendar ASAP so you can take advantage of that promising opportunity that you've just created for yourself. But what do you say when you reach out and your prospect says no? What's your strategy for dealing with no when it's on a cold call? And is that different from how you handle no over email? And if it is different, why do you think that's the case? And there are a couple of important points here. First, this is almost a trick question because just about everyone says no to that first ask when the venue is cold prospecting. So really what we're asking here is, when that initial resistance almost inevitably comes, are you prepared to respond? And what's your strategy? I want to talk for a second about why we're focusing on email resistance versus cold calling and what makes email rejection unique. And in some ways, it isn't unique. And that's the first point here. If you're prepared to dig beneath initial resistance on a cold call, you should be prepared to do the same over email. But too often, sales reps simply ignore or delete negative email responses to their email campaigns, sort of banking on the fact that a positive response will eventually come. And this may have to do with the fact that cold calls require a lot of effort, so you're more likely to keep pushing when you have a prospect on the phone, whereas email campaigns, particularly automated ones, or emails that go to thousands of prospects simultaneously, they don't require a lot of effort on your part, and that's part of their appeal. So you're primed for them to be a convenient source of interested leads, and you may ignore the ones that aren't convenient. But with email, a no actually gives you a lot of valuable information and an opportunity that you can use, which is why we're going to drill down into it a little bit more today. And one obvious piece of information that you get is that your message resonated enough for your prospect to reply, because they don't have to. They can unsubscribe, they can ignore, they can delete, but when they reply, they didn't do any of those things. They clicked reply, they typed a message, and they hit send. And that's an indication that they at least skimmed your message enough to understand what you're asking. And finally, your prospect's response gives you the chance to start a one-on-one conversation, which is already a lot more promising than where you were before you sent your email or launched your campaign. And as a bonus, these sort of asynchronous conversations like email, where it's not in real time back and forth, are often more likely to be resurrected at some future date than conversations that start with a cold call. But now that I've hopefully gotten you all excited about the promise of responding to email no's, I have to be a wet blanket for just a second. That's because some email no's really mean no, and you need to deal with them accordingly. So first and most important, when a prospect explicitly asks you to stop emailing them or to take them off your list or to be unsubscribed, you are required to do so. And second, your prospect may, in fact, not be a good prospect after all. And if that's clear from their response, it's an indication that you should remove them from your lists. But all the other varieties of no, which we'll talk about today, can present real opportunities to cultivate connections and conversations. So let's set that specific category of no aside, and let's talk about laying the groundwork for your email resistance strategy. So before you reply or even think about developing a reply strategy, here's a handful of questions to ask yourself about your process and goals and to help equip you to craft replies that give your prospect a reason to engage in a way that lines up with your overall business development strategy. So part of the point here is that every prospect no means that the sales rep hasn't demonstrated enough value to continue the conversation, but also offers an invitation for you to begin demonstrating that value. So if you compare it to cold calling, an email response is roughly equivalent to when your prospect answers the phone. They're not convinced yet, but you have the floor to show your prospect what they get from engaging. So you should think about what's in it for them. Do you have information, trends, or ideas to benefit prospects who may not be interested in buying right now? Also, what's in it for you? If someone isn't interested in your services right now, is it still worth that meeting? And then, of course, why do prospects buy from you? What factors go into choosing a service like yours? What is decisive when you win a deal, and how does that inform how you engage with prospects who may not quite be interested yet? Before I get into the individual replies, I just want to invite Deborah to offer any other introductory comments. I think you're on mute, Deb. There we go.
Sorry. When I think about the no's, it reminds me of when you often have folks over for dinner and you ask them, would you like dessert? And generally you hear, oh, no, I'm too full. And then when you bring out the apple pie or the tiramisu or the fruit and cheese, all of a sudden you hear, oh, I'll have a little of each. And of course, there might be someone in the group that really doesn't want dessert, and that's fine. But those initial no's are usually open to offering a little bit more.
Right, and we're going to be talking a lot about what prospects say and what they might really mean, and how you can dig a little deeper to get to that true state of affairs with your email reply strategy. So let's start walking through these different kinds of replies that you can expect to generate via a cold email campaign and how to think about turning them into conversations. And the first category is the most basic, most general, probably the most common. And that's when a prospect simply says in so many words that they're not interested. So here you have a prospect giving sort of an all-encompassing version of the not interested objection. And underneath, you have some possible subtext, what they might actually be saying that gives you an opportunity to show some value. And the key phrase here is, it hadn't occurred to me that I might have a problem. Again, no means I don't see value yet. They don't know that they have a problem that needs solving or that they could benefit from a solution. And the reason that it hasn't occurred to them is because they don't know what you know, that the ideas, insights, and ultimately products and services that you bring to the table can provide a better understanding of what really matters to their success. Not interested is a challenge for a number of reasons, not least because it might actually mean that the prospect isn't interested. So it's tempting to treat it that way. But for our purposes as sales reps who wonder how to turn a not interested reply into a conversation and maybe even an appointment, it's a challenge because it's an information void. Your prospect doesn't yet have the information that he or she needs to move forward with the conversation, and you don't have the information you need to assess your prospect's specific situation. So we need to take a few baby steps at this point in order to bridge that gap. First, respond promptly. At the very least, you know your prospect is momentarily paying attention, so you should take advantage while you can. And doing so really can make the difference between a misconnection and a meaningful engagement. Second, show your prospect you're a real person. It's easy to dismiss a generic email campaign as impersonal, but a personal reply with information specific to your prospect can flip the script and instantly change a prospect's posture towards you. And then finally, start gathering that information that you don't have by asking pointed questions designed to elicit responses and provide a little momentum to the conversation. So I promised you we'd look at some real-world email responses, and here's the first one, which was generated by one of our own automated email prospecting campaigns. And the first email here with the number 1 was the initial response from the prospect, and the second email was the prospect's subsequent response after Scott replied. And I'll show you Scott's reply in a moment, but I think it's interesting to see these two prospect emails side by side because they show how much you can move a conversation forward with one thoughtful strategic reply. So the first email is basically a courteous version of, I'm not interested. And like most replies of the genre, it doesn't really offer any valuable information. But after Scott replied, the prospect volunteers a ton of valuable information about their current situation, their recent challenges, and their future mindset. So let's look at Scott's reply and think about why and how it was able to move the conversation forward. So right off the bat, it includes detailed information specific to the prospect, the fact that they used to be a business-wise client. Then it pivots right into a question about their current approach to business development and whether anything has changed in the time since they were previously a client. And then finally, it closes on a courteous note that acknowledges and highlights the value in exchanging ideas and information, even if it never goes any further. And you can see again from that previous reply that the prospect comes right back with information about what they're currently thinking about, what they previously thought about, and what they might be thinking about in the future. So a lot of information that Scott can use to continue the conversation or set a future date for follow-up. Okay, so here's another example where the initial response actually gives a lot of information, all of which paints a picture of why the prospect is not a good fit. And to sum it up, this gentleman works for a bank who's headquartered in Omaha and who runs potentially all the biz dev decisions from there, and doesn't have a lot of leeway to make decisions about his own business development tools and strategies. So he culminates with, thanks for the offer, but your time would be better spent on another financial institution. After Cynthia's reply, he writes back and says that actually his wife is a local contact, president of a local bank, and she just might be interested in your services. So many sales reps would give up on this one, but Cynthia replied, and the prospect's response included a local referral for his own wife. So let's look at the response from Cynthia that elicited the referral, and it's actually pretty straightforward. It's prompt, starts with a courteous introduction, and it acknowledges that now might not be the right time, and then straight up asks for a referral. So she says, whenever you hear from any of your local peers that you're in need of an effective lead gen process, I greatly appreciate if you could pass her information along. And it worked. Cynthia sort of fished her wish. She asked for a referral and she got one. And so this is a very basic template that you can use to respond to a sort of generic, not interested reply, with the hopes of gaining something that might be valuable, even if it's just information, but hopefully something more substantive. And then finally, here's one example of a situation where a blunt no thanks turned into a back and forth exchange of multiple emails. Now, this didn't result in a sale or even an appointment, but that's really beside the point, because in most cases, B2B sales is a long game where relationships often grow out of casual connections, which start with conversations. So more than likely, this conversation will be the end of the road for these two, but it's 100% guaranteed that this prospect will remember this conversation more than she would have remembered an email exchange that ended at no thanks. And I'll just show you this first intervening response. And this is from a sales veteran that we work with and for whom we've developed an automated email prospect campaign. Just like the previous example, it's not that complicated. There's a courteous human introduction. There's a direct reference to something the prospect mentioned in her email, that she's doing fine and isn't in the market for a sales consultant. There's a direct appeal for a referral. In this case, our colleague didn't get the referral, but he got the next best thing, which is a good-natured back and forth with a prospect who started with no thanks, but who will likely remember the exchange should the need ever arise. Before I move on, Deb, did you want to mention anything about this category?
I think the examples speak for themselves, Sam.
Great, thanks. All right, so let's turn to another category of not interested, which is really just a sort of variation on the first category, but it's common enough and challenging enough that it deserves a closer look. And that's when a prospect says they're not interested because they already have a vendor or a partner who provides that product or service. They're getting what you're offering from someone else. So one important point here is that while everyone faces this brand of no to some degree, for sales reps in certain industries, it's a near guarantee that your prospect is already receiving your service from someone else. So think about IT or benefits or accounting or janitorial. These are all services that every business needs in some shape or form. So they either already have a vendor or they do it themselves. So it's imperative that you have a strategy for how to respond when your prospect says, we already have someone. And while the prospect may say they're happy with their current vendor, and that there's no need to change, there's still an opportunity to get your foot in the door and show value if you approach it in the right way. Because in reality, we already have someone just means, or just might mean, we have a limited perspective on our challenges and priorities, as well as how to address them. Their experience is entirely through the lens of their current vendor, which gives you an opportunity to provide value. So your first job here is to learn more about what it really means that your prospect already has someone. And you can do that by once again asking pointed questions to gain clarity. Next, you can create respect and trust by being upfront about the fact that you're qualifying your prospect in the same way that they're qualifying you. If their current vendor is servicing their needs adequately, or if they don't have a specific problem that you solve, that's okay. Your prospect will respect the honesty and may be willing to give you a shot to make your case. And finally, and this is the tough one, look to clarify the value of a conversation, even if they never become a client. So one good hook is to offer ideas, insights, and questions that your prospect can take back to their current vendor. So here's a real world example of how to turn around the "we already have someone" reply. And again, the first reply here is the initial one from the prospect that was generated by an automated email prospecting campaign. And the second is the next email from the prospect after our sales rep, Scott, replied. So this is obviously a 180-degree turn. And the thing I love about it is that both emails are so short and blunt. He basically says no, and after our rep replies, he says, okay. So let's look at the reply from Scott, which has a little bit of everything. So it starts out with a really good use of personalization, and it's an easy one. He checked their website and then congratulated them on a piece of information he found there that they had been in business for 4 decades, and mentioned that business-wise, we too had been in business that long. So he shows there's an actual human who's paying attention on the other end of the conversation. Then once again, Scott pivots to pointed questions about what it means that the prospect has a system. So the prospect here is in commercial real estate, so he knows, Scott that is, knows he might be referring to CoStar, which is a common sense source of prospecting data in that industry. Next, he demonstrates honesty and professionalism by acknowledging that business-wise may not be the right fit, but that it might be worth learning a little more about areas where we could help. And then he closes on a courteous note. And in this case, it clearly works. Of course, we should also be honest with ourselves and recognize that it doesn't always work out this smoothly, even when you come up with a thoughtful and detailed reply. Still, it's clearly worth the effort, and it can move the conversation forward, even if it doesn't immediately result in a change of heart or an appointment. Deb, anything to add from you here?
I think these are so important, and you have to put yourself in the prospect's point of view. They think you're asking for money right up front, and they're thinking, I'm not giving you any money. I already have someone and it's fine. But the more you can show them that you might have some ideas or think a little differently than their current provider, you have an opportunity to at least have a conversation. And you have to remember that this isn't about selling your products and services at this point. You're simply selling the value of that meeting.
That's exactly right. And the 2 points here that I think are most important, of course, you can ask questions to gain some information. The prospect may not reply, but adding that personal note at the beginning, so easy to do by just looking at their website or their LinkedIn profile or whatever else. And then that trust established by making it clear that we're not looking to replace anything that's working for them. We're looking to supplement it if it's the right fit. And that's really laying the groundwork for a mutually beneficial conversation. Okay, so for our next category of replies, I'm going to throw a little curveball and talk about how even out-of-office replies can present opportunities to connect. Now, obviously, this isn't an example where we'll be talking about how to navigate prospect resistance or capitalize on the fact that your prospect has taken the time to respond, but it does offer a unique glimpse into the importance of having thoughtful, comprehensive reply strategy and how you can cultivate connections with even the bare minimum of information about your prospect. So you've seen these responses before, and while they don't offer you much, they do give you 2 key pieces of info. You know your prospect is off doing something, and you know the exact day they'll be back at their computer playing catch up. So here's an example of a template that sales reps can use to take advantage of that limited info in service of making a connection. And as you can see, it starts off on a personal note, mentioning the prospect's time out of the office. And then it pivots to a gentle reminder that the sales rep emailed them while they were out and asking if they're open to finding time on their calendar now that they're back. And here's another example with the same basic ideas at work, but a couple of key points here. So one of the concepts I'm hoping to get across today is that just like with any other cold prospecting channel, it's really critical for sales reps to do everything they can to make the most out of their email lead gen campaigns. And that means treating every single reply as if it were an opportunity. So we should, again, of course, be realistic and understand that we're not going to turn every reply or even most replies into opportunities, but especially with email, where you can use a template and where you can compose a quick but thoughtful response and send it directly to your prospect. The effort is minimal and the potential reward is very high. And then speaking of minimal effort, this is a great example of how an automated email from the sales rep and an automated reply from the prospect can still generate information that leads to a human-to-human connection, which is, of course, the ultimate goal. And then finally, your strategy needs to be customized to your own approach to cold prospecting. So not every sales rep is going to be comfortable sending an email like this to a prospect the day they get back into the office. But the opportunity has been created, and it's worth considering how to take advantage of it. Deb, did you want to mention anything here?
Got it, Sam.
Okay, so I know this presentation is nominally about strategies for turning email no's into conversations and opportunities, and it's true that most replies generated by email lead gen campaigns are of the no variety. So we should calibrate our expectations and build our strategy around that reality. But email campaigns can also generate a lot of yeses, and I thought it would be restorative and encouraging to end by looking at a few of those. So I'll just quickly tick through these because they're pretty self-explanatory, but here's one that you could call an ideal response, where the prospect enthusiastically responds about the opportunity to learn more with a list of times she's free to meet. So this is a total home run of a response. And I like this next one because the prospect starts off by apologizing for the delay in his reply, which shows how important it is to develop messaging that conveys that conversational human tone. I think it's safe to say that this prospect assumed he was receiving a one-to-one email from the sales rep, which is obviously the goal. And to top it all off, he invites Cynthia to lunch. So again, a perfect reply. I'm including this one because it's short and sweet and I like the bluntness. It's basically just yes, which is pretty sweet. This next one mentions and commends Scott's persistence before accepting the invitation to meet, and it highlights a really key point, which is that the reply doesn't always or even usually come in response to the first message. So our typical automated campaigns use 3 message sequences where the prospect receives up to 2 follow-ups over the course of a couple of weeks unless they reply. And some prospects receive multiple campaigns over the course of several years. So again, cold prospecting is a long game and persistence can pay off. And here's another extreme example of that same concept. This gentleman received 22 messages over the course of several months, excuse me. Some were from automated campaigns like the ones we've been talking about today. Others were probably invitations to insider sessions like this one. But again, persistence paid off. And then finally, 2 quick examples of replies to automated campaigns from prospects that ultimately became clients. Since we offer a prospecting tool here at BusinessWise, our focus is primarily on helping clients set first-time appointments. But of course, the ultimate goal is to gain new business. So it's great when that first appointment kicks off a successful process and ends in a sale. And so 2 great things about this response. Again, he apologizes for the delay, which means he really felt there was a human on the other end. And then second, he encourages Scott to follow up at a specific date. So he's not ready to talk now, but he thinks he will be, he says, in the middle to the end of February. Which illustrates, again, the longer term nature of email prospecting in many cases. It can be as much about creating warmer leads for future follow-up as it is about setting immediate appointments. And then one last one from a prospect who was clearly a little bit skeptical at first, but was open to learning more and eventually became a client. Deborah, any final thoughts?
Well, these final positive ones are wonderful. And honestly, they don't happen every day. At the same time, you can guarantee that if you don't send these messages, you're not going to get any of these opportunities. So while we certainly believe in other methods in terms of networking and cold calling, and of course, referrals are the absolute best, I know we would be very lost at this point without these email responses. And we encourage you to continue to try to improve your process, because sometimes the smallest changes can make big differences.
And something to keep in mind is these campaigns, for the most part, and maybe even exclusively in this presentation, were automated email campaigns. So these are emails that are going out every day for the course of several months without the sales rep having to do anything but field replies. And that's really why we're focusing on this, because the reply area is where the art and craft comes in. But the sending of these emails required basically no time investment other than setting up the initial campaign. So to conclude the presentation, I've just put together a few questions for you to think about as we open the session up for discussion in a moment. Think about, do you use cold email prospecting as part of your biz dev strategy? If you do, is it one-to-one emails or large-scale automated campaigns, or both? Do you handle them differently if the context is different? Do you handle resistance differently depending on the context? For example, cold call versus an email. And then think about your goals and your expectations. What are you hoping to achieve? And then what are your expectations for replies? Do you have a strategy for replying to no? Obviously, the central question today. And then finally, do you have information or ideas that would benefit prospects who are not interested now? If someone isn't interested in your services, is it still worth meeting with them?